Aperture.
Hello, thank you all for joining us tonight. My name is Michael Famighetti. I'm the editor of Aperture Magazine. For those of you who are not familiar with Aperture, it was founded in 1952 by a group of artists, writers, and curators as a common ground for photography. Aperture today is a multi-platform publisher that unites the photography community in print, in person, and online. Tonight, we are thrilled to be joined by Nigel Poor, Reginald Dwayne Betts, and Lawrence Bartley to discuss Nigel's book, The San Quentin Project, which has just been published by Aperture. The publication collects a largely unseen visual record of daily life inside San Quentin State Prison and demonstrates how that archive, as well as images by well-known photographers, were used in Nigel's course at San Quentin to reflect upon the experience of incarceration. The book also includes an array of illuminating texts, including interviews and essays by George Mesereau Coles L., Ruben Ramirez, Michael Nelson, Reginald Dwayne Betts, Rachel Kushner, and Lisa Sutcliffe. We first featured Nigel's San Quentin work in the 2018 issue of Aperture Magazine, which was titled Prison Nation and produced in collaboration with the scholar Nicole Fleetwood. And it's been an honor to continue to work with Nigel on this powerful book. Tonight's discussion will be moderated by Lawrence Bartley from the Marshall Project. Bartley is the director of News Inside, the print publication of the Marshall Project, distributed in hundreds of prisons and jails throughout the United States. He is an accomplished public speaker and has provided multimedia content for CNN, PBS, NBC Nightly News, MSNBC, and others. News Inside is a recipient of the 2020 Izzy Award for Outstanding Achievement in Independent Media. Bartley is also the co-host and co-creator of Inside Story, a new video series from the Marshall Project available in prisons and jails across the country. Tonight's program is organized in collaboration with the Marshall Project, so I wanted to thank the team there for collaborating with Aperture on this event. And this book and associated programming were made possible in part by the National Endowment for the Arts. For a limited time, you can use the discount code in the chat to purchase your copy of the San Quentin Project at a 20% off discount. We will be taking questions, so please put any questions that you have in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to get to them towards the end of the evening. And now I'd like to hand it over to Lawrence Bartley, who will introduce our speakers and will be moderating tonight's conversation. Thank you, Lawrence.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for having me. And thank you everyone for being here. Once again, my name is Lawrence Bartley. I'm the director of News Inside for the Marshall Project. But briefly about the Marshall Project, if you don't know, we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan news organization that reports on the U.S. criminal justice system. You'll find a range of stories. Also, you'll find recent stories about Derek Chauvin's record. You'll find stories about your Zoom interrogations about to begin. And most recently, we published a language package which goes into goes into thoughts about language in media, terms like inmate, prisoner, felon, offender, and the uses of it and how it stigmatizes people who are incarcerated. But I would like to introduce our esteemed panelists. First, we have Nigel Poor, who is a San Francisco Bay Area visual artist and professor of photography at California State University, Sacramento. In 2011, she began volunteering at Prison University Project at San Quentin State Prison. In 2017, Paul co-created the podcast Ear Hustle. I love Ear Hustle, by the way, with Earlonne Woods and Anton Williams, who were both incarcerated at San Quentin at the time. Her work has been featured in Aperture Magazine Spring 2018 issue, Prison Nation, and the New York Times. Next up is Reginald Dwayne Betts. He is a poet, a memoirist, and a teacher. Formerly incarcerated, he is now a lawyer and author of several award-winning books, including Felon, Poem, and A Question of Freedom, a memoir of learning, survival, and coming of age in prison. Betts is pursuing a PhD in law at Yale University, New Haven, Connecticut, and he recently launched the Million Book Project, which I'm sure you hear a lot about today. So I want to thank my guests for joining us here today. And I want to start with Nigel Poor. Please tell us about your work.
Great, thanks for the introduction. It's really nice. And I'm really pleased to be here with you all today. It's a very nice occasion, so thank you. I'm going to do a brief introduction, show some images, and then we'll go from there. So by way of introduction, I wanted to start with how I got inside of prison and why photography has been an indispensable part of all the collaborative work I do inside. So I started in 2011 teaching for the Prison University Project. And I was teaching a history of photography class. And of course, I wanted my students to learn about the history of photography. But what I really care about the most is how photography is a bridge for real and deep conversation. And that looking at and talking about photographs is like a social endeavor, because photography is about putting a story forward. And photography is really about communicating, but it also helps to trigger and populate our memory. So the image that's encompassed within the frame reveals its own narrative. And the photograph is as complicated and as interesting as any conversation or any story. You know, it carries everything a story or a conversation has, which is point of view and character and plot and subtext. And part of the real power of photography is its capacity for each person who looks at it to find their own meaning and to find themselves within the photograph. And the photograph also affords us the ability to have recollection and reverie, and it helps us meander through our own history. And because of that, the photograph becomes this vehicle for us to be able to bring our own stories back and share them with others. And I think that sharing stories is really an essential human impulse. And it's a way of saying that I am, I matter, and that I'm here. But the other issue is that stories and memories can be really jumbled and chaotic, and they can be difficult to assemble in a way that is accessible for others. And so I like to think of the photograph as a prompt and also as an anchor for recollection that allows viewers to drift between what's happening in the photograph and what's happening in their own imagination with their own stories. And so within the photograph, then they can commingle. So can we go to the second slide, please? I want to briefly talk about a couple of the assignments that I did in the class I taught at San Quentin at the Prison University Project. And as I said, it was a history of photography class, but I really wanted the men participating in the class to get the idea of what it's like to create something, to not just look at something. So the first assignment that we came up with was called the verbal photograph. And what it asked people in the class to do was to dredge up a really important memory that they didn't have a photograph of, and to take that memory and distill it down to a single image, something that wasn't chaotic and jumbled, but a single image, and then describe it as if they were holding a photograph in their hand. So talk about perspective, scale, focus, all of those things. And what I really loved about these verbal photographs is that they were invitational in the way they were writing. This example by one of the students, Marvin, I just want to read just a few parts of it, because he says things like, if you look behind the light, you will see. If you turn your attention to the woman, you'll see that she's wearing long sleeves. If you look closely, you'll notice the bangles on her wrist. So he's really acting as a tour guide, giving us an intimate experience of his memory. And although this is written, it is photographic in its presentation. The part that really kind of stunned me and beguiled me was the way he ends it by saying, this memory means so much to me because it's what I perceive to be my earliest memory of my mother. And one of I think the poignant things about photography and writing and arts of all kind is that they always are commingling fact and fiction. And I I don't know if that matters. I think it's actually a really beautiful human thing. And Marvin in his essay points that out, that this memory may or may not be true, but it's important to him simply because it is his memory. Next image, please. The next assignment we had was to bring in images by well-known artists, and I got permission for the men to be able to take them back to where they lived and have them on their walls for a couple weeks. And the idea was for them to really sit with the photographs. There were 2 copies of each image, and on one side, I asked them to map the photograph, which was to look at it, that's what you see on the top, and kind of dig into it and bring out all of the subtext that they see, mark anything that was of interest to them, and then take that mapping and create a narrative based on their experience of the photograph. So in this one, this is an image by William Eggleston, and the student who did this was just 100% sure that this was a gas station at the corner where he grew up. And the story he wrote was about his family and his experience in this neighborhood. And you can see he has a family tree there. And it wasn't taken in his neighborhood, but this is a real example of how the photograph can be a personal experience, because the student was able to locate himself in the photograph and then write about it from his own experience. So for me, the mapping part on top is the evidence, the detail, and then the narrative is this beautiful unfolding of someone's experience. Next image. I've been teaching for the Prison University Project for a while when I gained access to this really amazing archive of photographs taken at San Quentin between about the 1930s and the 1980s. There's a lot of mysteries about the archive, but it's assumed that most of them were taken by correctional officers. They were just kind of this jumbled collection. And I started going through them, and I really wanted to figure out some kind of project to do with the negatives, one to preserve them, but also kind of dig in and find a deeper meaning in them. Next slide, please. So this is just an example of some of the images in the archive. They were all done with 4x5 negatives, so they're quite large. They're very good quality. And what was fascinating to me about the archive was there were images in there that were clearly taken in prison, violent images, very disturbing images, but there's also images of everyday life, of people with their families, people at work, people living a life like they would any place else. And so I guess that's one of the things I really want this project to express, is that life inside prison, as complicated and varied as it is anywhere, it isn't all violence. It isn't all deprivation. There's all kinds of things that are happening inside. Next image, please. So this is an example of one of the images. It's called Stabbing in the Gym. And on the surface, we think we know what's happening in this image. But what I wanted to do was to work with a group of guys to help kind of dig into what was happening there. And so I used the same idea, which was to give images to men to live with and map. Next image, please. And this is an example of the mapping. So this is one that Ruben did. And what he writes on the back of this man is just so poetic and surprising. He talks about the man in architectural terms. And I'm going to read a little bit of what's on there. He says, the arms symbolize buttresses attempting to prevent the structural failure of a once proud cathedral. And he talks about the 2 arms that are holding him up. One is encouragement and enlightenment, and one is indifference and authoritative tyranny. And the body is moving back and forth between these 2 impulses. What I hoped was, after people looked at the archive images and they saw the ones that had these interventions, they would realize that all of the archive images were as deeply complex as the ones that were written on. And so at first blush, what viewers may have thought their understanding of the image was in fact lacking, and in some ways folly. And they needed the writing that was on them. The mapping is the key to really understanding what was happening in there. So next slide. So all of this work that I'm talking about now is all part of this publication, the San Quentin Project, which is a collaboration between myself and a group of men who at the time were incarcerated at San Quentin. A bunch of them are actually out now. And Michael kind of introduced what the book is. But what I really want to make clear is that the book is about storytelling, and it's about people describing their own experience and using the photographs as prompts to be able to do that. So there is my introduction, and I will end there.
Absolutely amazing. Thank you for that. I have like 1,000,001 questions, but I'll save them. Next up, we'll go to Reginald Dwayne Betts. Can you please tell us a little bit about your work?
Yeah, I mean, and I'll talk about it, and I'll try to talk about it in the context of Nigel's project, which I got right here, the San Quentin Project. And I think part of what I find fascinating about this book is that we think about how prison hides itself from the world, and we recognize it being true. And because it's true, the images of incarceration, you ask somebody, what do you think about when you hear the word prison? That go-to will inevitably be violence. That go-to will inevitably be a kind of degradation of humanity. And you look at the cover of the book, and it's two men playing tennis. And frankly, you have no real way to know that they're incarcerated. And so, I think about my own work, and my own work is trying to echo this need to um, not not humanize those who are incarcerated. I feel like it's you can't humanize humans. But I feel like the central component of my work is to reveal something that seems to be hidden and intentionally hidden, and I think this book is doing the same. And so one way in which I connect with the book is and one thing I think is most powerful about the book is giving agency to the people to name their own experiences. And so even when you think about it in the context of violence, it's having agency to name how you imagine and think about violence and contemplate violence. But more than that, I think is I saw the image of the guy in Native American garb and ready for like a ceremony. And this is a thing you don't expect to happen in prison. And I think when you become more aware of these kind of things happening in prison, then you have more space to demand that none of this happens in prison because prisons stop existing in the way that we understand them. A few things about my own work. The Million Book Project is intended to bring a freedom library in the prisons. 500 book collection that argues about what it means to be human in this world, what it means to be a survivor in this world, what it means to be somebody who's trying to reckon with all of the things we reckon with in this world. And I just think literature's always been essential to the project of me becoming, and I think essential to the project of all of us becoming. And so I think about something like the San Quentin Project, and I find it a powerful component of something like the Million Book Project for two reasons. One is because it brings the imagery of incarceration to light. But I think two, and more importantly, I think it reminds us that we have some type of ownership about how we imagine the world that we live in. I think that's kind of central to the project, and for folks inside to see it, to really see how people have decided to create their own stories from the images that they've been given.
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, I have a similar question for both of you. Um, I myself was incarcerated, and I started News Inside because I knew that it was really tough to get reading materials inside of prisons and jails. It was very difficult, particularly when I was taking part in college classes in order to get, reading material to use as sources to cite on my papers. So I want to ask Nigel, how difficult or easy was it for you to get reading material into your students?
Well, that's interesting because a lot of my class was visual. Can I talk about how hard it was to get images inside the prison?
Yes, definitely. All that. All
Yeah.
that.
So when I started teaching the class, I made the assumption I would just teach the class I taught at my own university. And I was told very quickly that I couldn't bring any images in of violence, drug use, images of sex or children, or anything that was emotionally complicated, which was basically the administration saying you're teaching a class to kindergartners. Do you know what I mean? Like they wanted everything to be so dumbed down and without any hard edges that no adult, it didn't suit any adult. And the Prison University Project was very insistent that we bring in as many images as we could. And I ended up having a meeting with the associate warden and gave him a history of photography class. And they ended up letting me bring in most of the images. So I tell that as a little sidebar to say that, again, photography is a way of communicating with people and talking and bridging differences. And once the administration could see what photography could do, I was shocked that they said yes to it. But I was also, Lawrence, aware that it was going to be very hard to get books in there. And so I intentionally, with that class, wanted to do exercises and assignments that didn't require that. What it required was the intelligence and the creativity of each person in the class. And they carried that within them. They didn't need books to do that. And that was the idea of the class, that everything's taken away, but you cannot have your imagination taken away from you. And once you tap into that, I think there's, I mean, as corny as it sounds, there's an intense freedom in that, and knowing that there's no way anyone can take that from you, whether you can get the books or not. Now, that's not going to work for a math class or a statistics class, but it worked for the photography class, and that made it exhilarating.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because photographs and the way you go about your course, that invites a lot of imagination through photographs. A lot of people incarcerated will live vicariously through those photographs, but you're giving them opportunity to actually unpack their thoughts, which is really, really cool.
Yeah.
But I found the places where imagination takes over the most, in my opinion, is in solitary confinement.
Yeah.
And I've read something from Duane in which he talks about books he received in solitary confinement. For those who haven't heard this, can you tell us about that, Duane?
Yeah, no, I mean it's interesting because it becomes it becomes his own mythology, right?
Yeah.
And I think I'd tell the story, but I want to emphasize a couple things. So I spent a lot of time in the hole. I mean, a lot compared to like none, I guess. Close to 2 years maybe. And each time in the hole, you learn that it's an underground network, of books that get passed around. And my first time in the hole in a prison, I learned that books were contraband. And folks were just passing books around, and you shout out for a book, and somebody send you a book. And so, somebody sent me a book, and it was really important. And it wasn't important, and I read all kinds of shit. But what was important is that this one book was the Black Poets, and it was the first time that I had really got exposed to Robin Haight and Mary Baraka and Etheridge Knight, and it profoundly changed the way I thought about the world. But I should say though, I mean, because we're having this conversation now, while the Black Poets was central, what was also central in a way was like all of the Reader's Digest books, those 4-in-1 books, because it's a lot of hours in prison, and I think that what people don't want to reckon with, and maybe what imagery helps people reckon with, is like how many hours pass. The picture says so much about the stillness of incarceration. And I mean, I read a lot of books in solitary, and fortunately for me, getting the Black Poets was just the start of a journey, that would last. I mean, I was in solitary 30 days before I came home from prison. And so, it didn't stop with the Black Poets, and it went into being a general population and sharing books, and buying books and trading books, and also it went to those frequent return times I returned to the hole.
Was it, for me, it allowed me to dream a lot and like envision myself in other places and do better things, and it kind of helped.
Shit, I was always in prison.
Always, yeah, all the time, right?
Yeah, man. Yo, see, this is the thing, man. I dream. I was in prison all the time, and I'm in prison all the time now. I commend you. The truth is, like, I think some people have a better imagination, and it takes it back to the visual. I
Mhm.
dreamed about prison in prison, and dream about prison now. I think the books allowed me to have a different understanding of my waking moments, which is fucked up, because it means that I learned to live in a dual reality. It was both like where I was in the moment and where I imagined I might be. But in some sense, like where I imagined I might be was the precursor to where I ultimately am. But I've never been I haven't slept well since they decided that appropriate place for a 16-year-old is a county jail, solitary confinement.
Yeah, I empathize. I empathize. But on the same subject of solitary confinement, Nigel, can you tell us about Michael, your student, and your
Yeah.
interaction with him? And tell
Oh,
us.
amazing. So his essay is in the book, and he was in my class. He got in trouble for some infraction, and he was sent to, as they call it in California, segregated housing unit, but the whole. And he didn't know how long he was going to be there. And he was very, I love this. He was so concerned about his grade and if he was going to be able to pass the class, even though he had all this horrible shit going on in his life. And so while he was there, I was able to get him these 2 photographs so he could complete the assignment. And the assignment was to look at 2 photographs and just write about the connections that you saw. And I think he was in the hole for, must have been about 8 weeks. Anyway, he wrote this most amazing essay about this Sugimoto photograph and a Richard Mizrak photograph, and saw such depth in them, and talked about the effects of time and about being alone and about what we value. And it's like a 9-page essay that's written with just the insert of a pen, because he couldn't have any hard materials in there. Yeah. And you get to the very end before you even realize that this is someone who's incarcerated and somebody who's in solitary, because he's got so much more to talk about beyond his immediate circumstance. And I think for most people, they couldn't imagine that. Like, how could you do anything except write about how horrible this is? But instead, his mind goes someplace else. Duane, and maybe a little bit of what you were talking about with the books, how to occupy your thoughts. Anyway, it's an really inspired piece. Yeah, it's wonderful. So it's in the book, so people can read it. Michael Nelson.
Yeah, I heard Lawrence like, yeah, and I said something, but I might have been inaudible. And one of the things I feel like, somebody, it's like we're in a fraternity, and when you're in a fraternity, it's certain like notes to the experience that you get that you almost only get if you got it from not being allowed to have a like a substantial ink pen,
Yeah.
to like what it means to, write your way to freedom, and write your way to freedom, and have your obsession be freedom, and not the conditions of confinement that you're dealing with.
In that essay, he talks a lot about silence and being present. And I mean, where he was in solitary, it's not silent, right? It's horrible. It's stinky. It's loud. It's like there's chaos everywhere. And I love how somehow he's able to filter all that out and be so present with his interior experience.
So Nigel, how you mentioned juxtaposing 2 photographs against each other and having people to write about the connections. So can you tell us some other ways that you get some of your students to think deeply about these photographs? Because sometimes photographs are just obvious. It's just literal. It's a photograph. So, how do you do it?
Well, I think that enthusiasm breeds enthusiasm, and expectation breeds expectation. So I love photography. I mean, Lawrence, I've been looking at all the photographs behind you, and believe me, I already have a lot of thoughts about what's there. So the photograph, I mean, in many ways, like the photograph is like looking at an autobiography. And so I think, I really think that it's part of showing up for fully showing up for people that you're working with, and letting them know how excited you are about it, and how much you want to hear what they have to say, and how you're going to listen to it. And anybody, no matter where they are, responds to that kind of respect, and they want to meet you with the same kind of respect. That's been my experience anyway, that you get what you give. And so I'm so excited when I talk to people about photography, and maybe they respond to that. But I just really think when people are given the opportunity to say something that matters to them, it turns you on, right? It like lights a fire, and you all of a sudden realize that within you, you have everything you need to matter.
Right.
So I think that's how it works. And it's the same with Ear Hustle, working on stories that aren't photographic. When you sit down and talk to somebody and you really connect with them physically through the sound of your voice, through the way you look at them, your body language, something really magical happens, and all of a sudden people's defenses go down and you hear incredible things. And I mean, now, you know, it's the voice that does it, but before it was the photograph. It was that photograph that gave us both the excuse to connect as two people. So that's my answer.
Okay, cool. So can you tell us how you got Duane to write the foreword of your book?
Magic? I don't know.
Yo, don't need front though. Like, this is the thing. Like, ear hustle is the shit. You know what I mean? And the thing about ear hustle that's so dope, right? Is first, I don't know if it's a podcast that exists, but I hate when people tell me that they know about prison. And I didn't realize how much I hated when people told me that they know about prison. Like, yo, do you know what this is, Lawrence? You ever peep this move right here, where you take a roll of toilet paper and you wrap it around your hand, right? And
Don't
and
everybody?
then you cup the bottom and you light it on fire.
Oh yeah, that's a bond. That's how you all.
You know what I'm saying? Right? And this the thing. This the thing. Like, so now it's clear that we speak in a dialogue. We got a dialectic that is fucking circumscribed by suffering, right? And I think that we live in a contemporary moment where I ain't know you knew that shit. You wasn't locked up in Virginia. This was on the humble. You could have been like, I don't know what the fuck you doing, and why do you got toilet paper on your table, right? But what happens is that we got this dialectic that is built around suffering and survival, and I think that we live in a contemporary moment post the new Jim Crow, written by Michelle Alexander, that has done an amazing job making us aware of the hardship of incarceration, the hardship of punishment, of the punitive nature of like what mass incarceration is. But that, has done very little to animate our lives. And ear hustle is the shit, right? It makes you like think about these things that like, I did 8 years in prison. I'm 40, so I still did a quarter of my life in prison. My homies did 50% of their life in prison. I think we like to try to reduce the substance of the footprint of that time, when like, even when you think about the formative stages of some of us, like, that footprint is larger, even if it gets to be reduced the longer we live, right? And I think what ear hustle does is take that footprint seriously, and like, being asked to do this shit, I was like, shit. Nigel Poor, you talk about Nigel Poor that I thought was a dude, because who named Nigel that ain't a dude from ear hustle? Shit, first of all, I'm like, it was easy to ask me to do this. I think the hard part was, honestly, man, the hard part is the pictures are hard, man. It's like, it runs the gamut. It does the same thing that Ear Hustle the show does. And and I think the pieces demand to see the people inside that did these annotations of them.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a fight, because the images are fighting with the text. And sometimes something as subtle as stabbing makes you miss that beautiful line about a cathedral that he does when he describes that image. And so, like, it was nothing to get me to do this, because, to be real, I did this shit just because I could get a cameo on Ear Hustle, and they ain't never offered me the shit. You know what I mean?
Oh, wait a minute, this is gonna change like that.
It might work, man. I'm gonna send a kite to her song, man. It's gonna hook you up.
For real, I could rap. You know what I mean? I make beats. Nah, honestly, I can't rap or make beats.
But I want to talk about the Million Book Project. Before I go there, Nigel, I thought it was super fascinating, the cover of your book and the explanation for the guys why they were in that position, because that's a classic prison pose. Like, people
Mhm.
that's a classic prison pose. But can you tell everyone who don't know, like, the reason why they were kneeling? Just break down the whole cover.
Well, I mean, I can't really break it down, except like I just see guys do that all the time, right? I don't know what to say any more than that. But like, the choice of the cover was really intentional, as Duane mentioned, like, to have something that didn't look immediately like prison, but somebody who's been in prison could probably see the way the guys are standing. They probably would see the fence in the background. So there's in stuff for people who know, and then something more on the surface for people who don't. That's what I would say to that. But the whole book is, so just want to say one quick thing. I know there's a lot of really difficult images inside the book. But again, that it is kind of what we do on Ear Hustle, is that those difficult things have to exist with things that are beautiful and loving and challenging, and all that stuff has to swirl together to have meaning.
Yeah, because it's part of the reality. You can't
Yeah.
leave out the obvious. I understand. But Duane, can you tell me your book, A Million Book Project? From my understanding, you're trying to get those books all throughout the country in prisons and jails. Can you tell me what the process has been so far?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like it's complicated because it's not just so one thing is like you talk about getting books in prisons and that's part of it because a lot of prisons don't have libraries or they don't have contemporary books. Contemporary poetry books usually have a print run of 1,000 books, so you're not gonna have and then so you're not gonna have Major Jackson's leaving Saturn in a prison. But man, he got this poem about smoking blunts and like these young dudes in a circle together thinking about the world when they 15.
Mm,
It's just worth the price of the ticket.
mm,
And you won't have the price of the ticket in prison, which is James Baldwin's collected. And you won't have Victor Laval, you know what I mean? You won't have Daniel Allen, you won't have Daniel Evans, you won't have for real, I'm reading Neil Gaiman's American Gods right now, and you won't have that in a prison. Honestly, a lot of spots won't have Black Boy. And more importantly, the world of prison, the library as a resource is limited because of space constraints. So even if you have a well-resourced library, folks only could go in there like a dozen or so at a time. So people not going because they got to work. They're not going because they playing ball. They're not going because they just got other things that compete with their interests. And the Million Book Project is about me in a sense. Like let me tell you what you should be reading. Let me curate this playlist for you. And it's a 500 book playlist that spans Homer to John Edgar Wideman. You know what I mean? And they got the Lucille Clifton and the Faulkners and the Sonia Sanchez's and the Robert Hayden, and they got the contemporary voices. They got the Pachinkos in there, and so it got the autobiography of like that joint. I'm gonna think of the name of him in a minute, but you got Natalie Diaz, Randall Horton, and so the thing is though to bring this collection of 500 books actually in housing units and to build micro libraries so that
mm.
I have the only fond memories I have of how being on a block, being on a housing unit, is playing spades. And I just think about like, what would it be though if we could chop it up around books a little bit too? You know what I mean? I mean, we still gonna talk about sports, we still gonna play spades, but what would it have meant for us to have a communion around like Victor Hugo, Don Quixote? Because folks wanted to read books and they were reading books, but this was something that happened in the solitude of your cell. What does it mean to make that a public event? And I think it's real consequence in people presenting that opportunity, both for folks who are engaging in college courses, but also for folks who aren't. I mean, shit. Ferranti, people love her books. You know what I mean? So you want all of that to be up in the mix and to be part of the conversation. Paul Beatty, you know what I mean? I mean, how can you not talk about the sellout? You know what I mean? Just have a book to straight humor. Chester Himes,
Mm.
have a book that's kind of grimy, that's about enjoyment and gives you a different sense of what your experience is. I find it sad that we have a lot of Americans who've done decades in prison and have never been close enough to touch a bookshelf. You know,
Mm. That's crazy. So
And
have
you're actually, but there's a special bookshelf that everything's fit into, right?
yeah, I like to think about it as a library, and I like to think about it as a library because I think sometimes when you say bookshelves, I have a bookshelf in my office. But that's because my bookshelf that need to be a meeting space. My office is the meeting space. So we're actually building these arcs, these freedom arcs, and it becomes a space of community. It
Mm.
has seating arrangements. I mean, it really is
Oh,
saying like, what does it mean to like? Somebody said, well, why don't you just give people books? And I was like, where do you live? And well, I got this 5 bedroom house with three
yeah,
bathrooms, and what? So somebody in prison doesn't deserve a space of their own
yeah.
where they could contemplate these books that have helped you build your life. Like you want me to just throw some books in a cell with them and
mm,
close the door? But you got fucking 5 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms and a half an acre yard. You know, it's a way in which people who are free um, don't understand what it means to be not free,
Yeah.
and they take for granted all of the small tokens of that
Yeah.
privilege. And so yeah, you know, Million Book Project, millionbookproject.org. We still raising money. We still doing our thing. We got a $5 million grant from Mellon, but frankly, books cost money, and building units and structures that are for people in prison costs money. And there are very few programs I think that people are doing that are for people in prison. Like these structures, these things are for people who currently have life sentences. And unless you know you could guarantee that folks won't have life sentences tomorrow, then you should support the Million Book Project. That's how I look at it.
Do you have buy-in from institutions to build structures inside of those prisons and jails?
Shit, man, you wouldn't believe, you wouldn't believe it, man. You know what I mean? I'm talking about states, man. They like, yo, you think we want people like living in hell? We work here. And also every freedom library we install in one for the staff too, for COs and guards, right?
Mm.
But you know, so we have I mean, I'm surprised at the buy-in. I could name the states: Louisiana, Massachusetts, Illinois, Georgia, like huge buy-in. West Virginia, folks that we partner with, folks that we've showed the design to, folks that we've discussed how to create the space. And I'm not saying that I've always, you know, I mean, I'm a convict, so you know, I mean, I've had a tense. I spent more than 18 months or so in a hole. I went to prison at 16, so I didn't have the greatest relationship with COs. But I also recognize that COs are frequently closer to my family than the fucking academics I'm around on a daily basis. You know, COs is folks that got might got a high school diploma and they just trying to get by. They ain't, you know, like they closer to the people that I know in some real ways than some of the academics that I deal with now. So when people say, do you think you have a lot of resistance from COs? I feel like I'm selling the same project to them. And I'm
Mhm.
selling the same dream to them. What does it mean for them to live close to books? What does it mean for them? You know it, Lawrence. You'd be like, you keep talking that shit to me, but you doing a life sentence too. I mean, you might be doing yours 13 hours at a time, but where your cell phone at right now? You know what I mean? Like where your laptop computer, you know? And so they get that, you know, and they trying to like push back against that too and trying to have some dignity in the work that they do. You know, if they got to do it, I think they want some dignity to it. So I've been really surprised at the buy-in, but I haven't been surprised. You know, I mean, people want to live better, and books. Who's complaining about books? You know what I mean? Like actually complaining. All the things that I went to the hole for, I never actually went to the hole because somebody said, "Yo, Shahid, you can't read that book. You going to the hole for picking that book up." Like that's the one thing that nobody ever actually beefed with me about was a book.
Okay, cool. So, Nigel, can we expect to see any copies of the San Quentin Project on Reginald's book?
Well, I'm hoping, but there are two issues. Hardcover, but we're making some soft covers for it. So I'm hoping that that will help. And I don't know about, I think we'll have to talk about editing, but I'm hoping that's going to work out. But I know the soft cover, it has to have soft covers.
Okay. Okay. Can you explain why it has to be soft cover, Duane?
Yeah, and one we're gonna do it. We're gonna make it happen. We already, you know, been in discussions. I've been in discussions with Michael and the team at Aperture. We're gonna make it happen. They got a special print run just for us with a special ISBN. It's a Freedom Edition of the
Nice.
San Quentin Project, right? But it has to be soft cover because a lot of states don't allow hardback books, and and it's no real reason. I mean, you can have a padlock, but you can't have a hardback book. So like so sometimes it's like no legitimate reason for it, but I understand. You know, I think you know, rules are rules, right? And some rules you don't want to sweat. And so I have been working these partnerships with it. A bunch of publishers though who said like I will make a paperback version. And Aperture said, look, man, we want this to be a part of the project. And I wanted it to be a part of the project because this is a way to make people inside visible to people inside. And it's to several writers who've been incarcerated as a part of the project. So Mitchell Jackson, Randall Horton, Susan Burton. It's several folks, me, who have been a part of the project who have been inside. And this was another way to make that happen. So yeah, we just getting the paperback edition.
Cool. Cool. Well, thank you, both of you. Now we're going to transition to the Q&A. We have some questions queued up for you all. The first one is from Florian. She's asking this one to Nigel. She said, "I'm curious about the original writing on this stabbing in the gym image. Is this labeling done by the prison? How did the institution use these images originally?"
Yeah, okay. So the images were taken by correctional officers, and the writing that you see, not the writing by the men, but the block writing that's on it is printed onto the negative as identification marks. So some of them will have a person's correctional number on it, a date, and then a brief description like what was happening in it. So that's how the negatives came. Yeah, it's basically I'm guessing an organizing
Okay.
something.
All right. This next question is for Duane. At Greenhaven, it's from Judith Benjamin. At Greenhaven Correctional Facility in Stormville, New York, they banned Michelle Alexander's book. There are other prisons that only allow hardcover. How can we help with the Million Book Project, and what states are involved with this project?
I'm gonna say something controversial. I hate being on these things. Um, like so, look, I think I think we toss around the word ban too casually, and I know that some books don't get permitted to be allowed in prisons, um, but I do think we need to ask what we mean when we say a book was banned. I think we need to ask what we did to stop it. A lot of times, like JoJo sends a book into his homie, some random CEO says, "Nah, I think this is a conflict," and then doesn't let it in, and then like JoJo's like, "The book was banned." Well, what did you do about it? My book was banned in Virginia. I didn't just start telling people my book was banned. I had conversations with people in Virginia. We made phone calls. We did a cease and desist order. I talked to the assistant attorney general of Virginia. I had a fucking chapter in my book called How to Make a Knife in Prison. So she was like, "Homie, you got a chapter called How to Make a Knife in Prison. I mean, I understand that you want it in, but do you see our point?" And I was like, "Yeah, but I don't think they read the whole chapter because that's not really what the chapter was about." And I'm gonna be honest, when my boy read it, because the book been in prison for like the last 7 years, my homeboy read it and wrote me a letter and was like, "What is this Fisher Price ass explanation of making a knife you got?" So he was clowning me for the shit. You know what I mean? And I was like, in fact, the whole chapter was about how to like push back against violence and not get involved in these things. And she was like, "Oh, well, can you send me the book so I can read it?" And
Mhm.
then she read it, and they sent my books that the dude I bought, and they gave it to everybody, and it wasn't an issue. So I just want to first pause and be like, let's not just bandy about that word ban, and it just becomes like another way to discredit everybody involved without saying, yeah, it was banned or denied, or some prison was denied access to the book, and then I filed a lawsuit, and then the court said X. Like if you haven't done all those things, then don't say it was banned. I just like I feel like you're doing all of us a disservice. If you
Mm.
haven't done the work to file a lawsuit and challenge it and say that it violates the constitutional rights of some prisoner to have access to books, right? If you haven't done that, then don't say it was banned. Um, and then what states I'm working with? I'm working in every state in the country. This is a national project and it's a local project. And what can you do to help? Haven't just spent 3 minutes criticizing your comment. I will say that if you so desire, you can go to millionbookproject.org and you can make a donation, you know, and you could tell your friends about it because
Mhm.
ultimately we're also trying to do the work to make sure that books that should be in prison are in prison. And some of that is about building trust and having relationships with more than just the line level COs so that you could talk about complicated books and help folks understand why this book is important. And like a chapter like How to Make a Knife in Prison, it's in fact not about making a knife in prison and shouldn't be judged on its face.
Yeah. I think what you said is so interesting about don't say the book is banned, actually do the work and find out what the truth is. I would say it's not so much criticism. What your story points out is that as individuals, we do actually have power to make some change. It might be smaller change, but if we're not lazy about it, we actually can like slowly make our way with inside an institution and try to make change happen. Everybody can do it if they care enough to try to push it a little bit. So I think it's a great point to make.
Excellent. All right. This next one is from Kara Nat, and it's for myself and Duane. It says, clearly the light that Nigel mentioned trying to lighten her students was lit in you both at some point while you were in prison. Do you remember that moment you realized that you had what you needed to get out? tell your stories, and become advocates for others? You can answer that, Dwayne.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna be honest, man. I like all of this stuff is new. I did a bid. Did a bid from 1996 to 2004 when most people didn't know the word general, didn't know the word general population, let alone mass incarceration. And so, the things I developed within myself was about trying to build a life for myself when I was free. It wasn't about talking about prison, helping people get out of prison. And I've just been deeply fortunate. I am deeply grateful that the roadblocks that have been set in my way when I came home have led me to law school, led me to get a law degree, and that law degree led my homies to be able to say like, "Yo, Shaheed, man, you a lawyer now? Can you represent me on this parole thing? I need your help." And I've been able to get friends out of prison because of that. But it's hard to pretend like that was I did a Zoom once, and my homie said, "What the fuck is Shaheed doing this Zoom meeting from? Where's he held hostage at?" And I feel like I've been held hostage in prison since 1996. And so these things I've been doing have not been aimed at any particular goal. They've been aimed at trying to find freedom for myself. And I've been really fortunate in some sense of being able to develop some skills that help me get freedom for other people. And you see that humble brag? I got 3 people I did time with out of prison. Like I got my cellie off a life sentence out
Ooh.
of prison. That's a hell of a humble brag.
Commendable. I wish he was my lawyer. This one is for you, Nigel. Could you talk a bit about how you perceive the role of a photographer, especially when they are depicting populations and situations that they themselves do not experience?
The role of do you think they're asking about the role of the photographer in the archive pictures?
Want me to read it again?
Yeah, I can try. I'll answer it in 2 ways. This may not be what they want to hear, but I'll answer it in 2 ways. The role of the photographer in the archive. So in that archive project, those photographs were taken by correctional officers to document things for the prison. They weren't taken by artists. They weren't taken by outside photographers going in. They were doing it as part of their job. So if there was a violent something that whatever happened, they were documenting it for a purpose. So they were COs, but they are actually from within the institution. Like you guys said, the COs are doing time too. They just are doing it in chunks of, whatever, 13 to 20 hours. So they were part of the system taking it. If you are asking me about a photographer like myself going in and taking pictures in the prison, that's a different question. I don't actually do that. I don't take pictures inside of the prison for a couple reasons. I mean, I do every once in a while for Ear Hustle if we need stuff for our website, but I'm personally not interested in taking pictures inside prison. I don't think I'd have anything to add to the conversation. That's why I work on Ear Hustle, because it's more collaborative and we're doing stories together. So I personally would not take pictures inside of a prison unless I'm taking pictures of my friends and they're like you would take pictures of anyone else. But to go inside and try to do a photographic project about prison doesn't interest me in any way.
Okay. This next question, I believe is for you, Duane. What do you anticipate will be different about the freedom version of the San Quentin book project? What will need to be
I wish I never said that. Sorry, Duane.
Oh man, this book is hard, yo. This book is hard. I mean, this book I don't know. I find myself being more paternalistic than I like to be. So let's just say, let me answer this question in a way that doesn't consider what DOC might think about what should be and what shouldn't be. I mean, I was in a prison, yo, Shaheed, man, they killed this dude. What? Yeah, man, they just killed the man, and I'm in a hole. And somebody, somebody beat somebody to death in the cell above me. Um, the images aren't they aren't I didn't do time in the worst prisons. But I, experienced enough and I saw enough, and the images aren't hypothetical. I was in a cell beside a dude who tried to commit suicide, and we were mean. I mean, we were like mean. I could imagine this book coming in, and I'm like, yo, dog, yo, is this your fucking cell partner with his arm sliced up like he cutting up a pizza? Don't let this dude have no razors. And we laughing and joking about the shit like it's funny. and it ain't funny. You know what I mean? And I'm like, yeah, it was on the yard, and he's about to knock your eye up like that. Like all of that has a connotation and a context that reminds me that so much of prison was was a kind of brutalist humor, and
Mm.
learning how to navigate it in a way that everybody maintained their dignity, but you learn lessons about how to act, right? And so you ask me what images might be in there or might not. If it's my choice, I find that I'm asked to answer a question that I don't want to answer. You know, I don't want to be paternalistic, but I've been in a cell with people who tried to hurt themselves. I don't want to be reminded of that shit, you know? And I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. You
Yeah.
know, people talk that shit about, you know, prison censorship, and I'm like, what the fuck do you mean? Like, what about when you have to answer a serious question about what do you allow inside and what the thing that you allow inside does? You know, it's so easy to just fucking blame people for the shit that they do, and imagine that like you and your wisdom will always make the right decision if it comes down to whether or not the decision you make leads somebody to get fucked up in this world. And I don't know, right? And my name is behind this shit. And I don't know what images won't make it in. You know, I feel like I feel like part of the power of this book is just revealing something to the outside that they don't know. People on the inside know. I mean, we live with that shit all the time. So I don't know if like some of the stuff I ask myself if we need to see. But at the end of the day, like I'm willing to go inside any prison and be like, this is the decision I made. I might have been wrong, but this is the decision I made. Like I don't want you seeing that shit on my back. And so I'm not sure. And that was like, I feel like that person was a plant.
It's a hard question. It reminds me when I was working on this project, I remember someone saying, how can you show those photographs to guys inside? You're such, like, I mean, they were pretty much taking me to task. Like, why do you think they want to see that? Why would you do that to somebody? And I remember talking about it with the guys inside, and their reaction, at least, I mean, this was at San Quentin with a very specific group of guys, is they wanted to see those pictures because they could relate to them. And they felt like by looking at them and talking about it, somehow they were diffusing the intensity of them. But that's because they had the ability to talk and write about them. And I think it's going to be very different for someone to just look at the pictures and not actually be part of the project.
Right. Like I told Michael the same thing. I said, like, well, I'm not gonna be paternalistic to a group of people I'm in community with. I'm gonna tell them straight up, look, I'm not deciding this for you. I'm your educator. I'm bringing these joints in, and you got to deal with it or not. And it might be fucked up. And if it's fucked up, and I got to figure out how to deal with the blowback if it's fucked up. But I cannot be an effective educator if I'm constantly asking permission.
I
And so,
know.
you know, we have created a space in which we just gonna rumble with it together. And that's, I mean, I taught this poem to some fucking high school kids this year, and I had to apologize. I was like, yo, you know, I think if I would have read it, recognizing that I was teaching you, if I would have revisited it before I taught it, I might not have taught it. And they were like, yo, I mean, it's life. So I think it's one thing what you do with people who you're in community with, and you could fail with people who you're in community with. But when you have a project like this, and I'm not in community with the millions of people who I want to have access to the books I bring
Mm.
in. And it ain't just this book. You know what I mean? Like it's like a lot of books. It's a lot of books that just have like one sentence that could horrify you. And it's like Stephen King. Have you heard what Carrie did? Like I don't even want the whole book to exist in it, but it has to, you know. And so like
Oh,
it's a that was a powerful question. I think that that's the human dilemma though. It's how do you reckon with what it means to having your power, the potential to cause somebody harm by what you expose them to.
yeah.
Yeah, indeed. We have a million more questions, but unfortunately, we are out of time. But I do want to say thank you to Nigel and Duane for joining us. I mean, this is a super conversation. I got lost in it. I forgot that we even have an event. But but it's so dope, man. And I love to get up with you all again. I love what you do once
Please.
again, Nigel, with Air Hustle and Duane. I already told you I love what you do. I love that that profile you did on the vice president. It was really cool. And I got a lot of questions about that from formerly incarcerated females. I'll talk to you about that later. Like some time to discuss that. But,
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, definitely. But thank you all. Thank you all. I
Thank
think
you.
I learned a lot from you all. And
Thank you. I'm sending you both hearts.
Thank you.
Thank you both. That was really lovely.
About all.
More conversations, I hope, to come.
Yeah, definitely more conversations to come. I mean, we coming on Ear Hustle. Hey, Lawrence, you trying to be on that joint?
I'm trying to
Hey,
be on
season
that track
8.
from there.
We're
I'm
booking
there.
you for season 8.
Bet. You know, I still got a state number. You know, I mean, I try to act like I ain't have one. They was like, nah. The Connecticut bar examiners was like, you got a state number. I was like, I don't, for real. I'm out. And they was like, no, we looked it up, 251534. So, you know, I mean, I'm in.
You are in, definitely.
All right, y'all take care.
Bye.